My family set a trap to test my fiancé before the wedding. It backfired big time. Growing up in my family was like being in a constant comedy skit where the men were always trying to outdo each other with pranks and challenges. My dad, uncle, and cousin had this weird obsession with testing each other, and it wasn't just a once-in-a-while thing, it was a lifestyle for them. And when I say testing, I don't mean fun little dares. No, these were full-blown, borderline ridiculous challenges designed to see who could handle what. When I introduced my fiancé Tim into the mix, I knew they'd have their eyes on him. Tim's a chill guy, super smart, really kind, and definitely not the kind to get into petty competition. But to my dad and the crew, that didn't matter. To them, any guy who was going to marry into the family had to go through their unofficial initiation. At first, I thought it might be okay. You know, harmless stuff like a few questions or maybe a game of chess. Well, they did start small, if you can call 4 back-to-back chess games small. They were testing his patience, I guess, and seeing if he'd get frustrated or bored. Tim, being the sweetheart he is, just went along with it, probably thinking it was some quirky family bonding thing. I mean, he's the kind of guy who wouldn't complain even if he hated every second of it. But things didn't stop at chess. Nope, not with my family. The next test was more annoying and definitely weird. My cousin suggested slashing one of Tim's car tires to see how he'd handle the situation. It's just a little challenge, they said. Let's see if he can fix it himself or if he calls for help. They didn't actually consult me about this genius idea. They just went ahead and did it. Tim came back from their little hangout one day with a weird look on his face. When I asked what happened, he just smiled and said, "Oh, your cousin helped me change a tire today." It took me a second to realize what he meant. I couldn't believe they actually slashed his tire. And the worst part? Tim didn't even complain. He just dealt with it like the absolute trooper he is. I confronted my dad about it, but he brushed it off. "It's just how we bond," he said, laughing. "He passed the test, didn't he? He didn't whine or call for help." I was furious, but also a bit confused. Why was this even a thing? Why did they need to test him like this? To my dad, uncle, and cousin, it was all in good fun. To me, it felt like they were going out of their way to make Tim uncomfortable. As if that wasn't enough, they decided to start asking him the most random and personal questions. What's a joke you'd tell your future mother-in-law? How do you feel about kids? What are your thoughts on Jesus? Yeah, they went there. Tim answered everything politely, probably thinking they were just trying to get to know him better. But I could tell they were looking for reasons to judge him. The worst part was how they kept bringing up his asthma. Tim has a mild condition, nothing too serious, but he does carry an inhaler just in case. To my family, though, this was a weakness. They'd tease him, calling him soft or saying he was making excuses whenever he mentioned it. I can't count how many times I told them to stop, but it was like talking to a wall. My dad would just wave me off, saying, "It's all part of the game, sweetheart. You're ruining the fun." Then there was the fishing trip. My dad and uncle decided it would be a great idea to see how manly Tim was by testing his fishing and hunting skills. Now, Tim isn't a country guy. He grew up in the city, so fishing and hunting aren't exactly his forte. But again, he went along with it because he wanted to make a good impression. They spent the entire day grilling him, not just about fishing techniques, but also throwing hypothetical scenarios at him. What would you do if you were stranded in the woods? How would you handle a bear attack? Tim did his best to answer, but no matter what he said, they'd find a way to mock him or call him slow. After that trip, I could see Tim was getting worn down. He didn't complain, but I could tell he was exhausted from constantly being under their microscope. I told my dad they needed to chill, but he wasn't having it. "This is what we do," he said. "It's tradition. If he can't handle a little teasing, what kind of husband is he going to be?" I was beyond frustrated. How could they not see the damage they were doing? Tim wasn't just being tested, he was being bullied. They were taking it way too far, and I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. The worst part of all this? They genuinely thought they were helping. In their minds, they were preparing Tim for the real world, making sure he was tough enough to be part of our family. But all they were really doing was pushing him away, and me along with him. I knew something had to give. Either they backed off, or I'd have to make some tough choices about who was really going to be in my life going forward. So my dad, uncle, and cousin came up with this brilliant idea to take Tim on a camping trip. They pitched it like it was going to be a fun guy's weekend. Fishing, hiking, and just hanging out in the great outdoors. I wasn't thrilled about it, considering their track record. But Tim thought it might be a good chance to bond with them. I figured, what's the worst that could happen? Turns out, I seriously underestimated them. Tim left early in the morning, all excited, with his camping gear packed and ready. He kissed me goodbye and said he'd see me in 3 days. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling that something was going to go wrong. By evening, I was pacing the living room when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tim. All it said was, "Back early, be home soon." My heart sank. Why was he coming back so soon? He was supposed to be out there for 3 days, not barely one. When Tim walked through the door, he looked like he'd been through hell. His face was pale, and there was this tired, frustrated look in his eyes. I asked him what happened, and he just shook his head, saying, "I'll tell you everything, but I need a minute." He sat down on the couch, took a deep breath, and started explaining. Apparently, everything was fine at first. They set up camp, went fishing, and even cooked up a decent meal. But then, out of nowhere, my cousin suggested they go on a survival challenge. Tim, being the good sport he is, agreed to it without really knowing what he was getting into. The challenge turned out to be a twisted game. They hiked deep into the woods, far away from the campsite. Once they were in the middle of nowhere, my dad pulled Tim aside and handed him a backpack, telling him it had all the essentials he'd need to survive the night. Then they just left him there. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They left him in the woods? Alone? Tim nodded, his jaw tight. "But that's not the worst part," he said. "When I opened the backpack, my inhaler wasn't there. That's when I lost it. I couldn't wrap my head around how anyone could be so cruel. They knew he had asthma, and they deliberately hid his inhaler? That wasn't just reckless. It was downright dangerous." Tim went on, explaining how he tried to stay calm, knowing that panicking would only make his breathing worse. He spent hours wandering, trying to find his way back to the campsite, but he was getting more and more tired. Eventually, he found a trail that led him back to the road, and that's when he decided to call it quits and head home. As he talked, I could see how much the whole thing had shaken him. Tim's not the type to show a lot of emotion, but this was different. He felt betrayed, and honestly, so did I. When he finished, I was fuming. I couldn't believe my own family would do something so heartless. This wasn't just a stupid prank or a test. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let it slide. I asked him if he wanted to confront them, but he just shook his head. "I'm done with them," he said. "I don't need to prove anything to them. I'm not going to play their games." His calmness made me even angrier. Not at him, of course, but at my dad, uncle, and cousin. They put Tim in a dangerous situation just to see how he'd react. Who does that? I couldn't let this go. They needed to know how messed up their actions were, and they needed to know it from me. The next day, I called my dad and told him we needed to talk. He acted like nothing had happened, like it was just another day. When I brought up the camping trip, he laughed. "Oh, Tim told you about that? He did fine, didn't he? He made it back in one piece." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Made it back in one piece? That's your standard now? I let him have it. I told him how reckless and cruel their so-called test was, and how they put Tim's health at serious risk. But my dad just brushed it off, saying it was all in good fun and that Tim needed to toughen up. I hung up, shaking with anger. They didn't care. They didn't see how dangerous their actions were, and they didn't care how much it hurt Tim, or me. This wasn't just about pranks or tests anymore. This was about respect, and they had none for Tim or our relationship. When I told Tim about the call, he just shrugged. "I didn't expect anything different," he said, but I did. I expected my family to at least care enough to apologize or admit they were wrong. Instead, they acted like it was all a big joke. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, thinking about how we'd gotten to this point. I always knew my family had their flaws, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt like I was stuck between two worlds, the family I grew up with and the life I was building with Tim. And right now, those two worlds were crashing into each other in the worst way possible. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't just let this slide. Something had to change, and it had to start with me standing up for Tim, and for us. After the camping trip fiasco, I was still fuming. I couldn't believe how far my dad, uncle, and cousin had gone with their so-called test. Tim, on the other hand, was surprisingly calm about the whole thing. I guess he had just resigned himself to the fact that my family wasn't going to change. But for me, it wasn't that simple. I couldn't just sit back and let them get away with putting Tim through that kind of crap. The morning after our heated phone call, my dad decided to stop by unannounced. He walked in like nothing had happened, all smiles, and casually asked if Tim was around. I was in no mood for small talk. "Seriously, Dad?" I snapped. "You think you can just show up here like everything's fine?" He looked genuinely confused. "What's the problem now? Tim's fine, isn't he? No harm done?" "No harm done?" I couldn't believe my ears. "You hid his inhaler in the middle of nowhere. What if something had gone wrong? This isn't a game, Dad." He rolled his eyes and let out a heavy sigh. "You're blowing this way out of proportion. We've all been through worse growing up. It's just how men bond. Well, Tim's not interested in your twisted version of bonding, and neither am I shot back. Before he could say anything else, Tim walked in. I could see the tension in his face as he greeted my dad. Tim didn't want a confrontation, but I could tell he wasn't about to back down either. "I'm not mad," Tim said, his voice calm but firm. "I just don't understand why you felt the need to do that." My dad shrugged. "You passed the test, didn't you? You made it back fine. That's what counts." Tim shook his head. "I didn't need to be tested. I'm here because I love your daughter, not to prove anything to you." Dad didn't say much after that. He just gave Tim a long, hard look, like he was trying to figure out if he should push the issue or let it go. In the end, he just muttered something about needing to leave and walked out. After he left, my phone started blowing up with messages from my brother and cousin. Apparently, Dad had filled them in on our argument, and they were all too eager to jump in with their 2 cents. "Come on, it was just a prank," my brother texted. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. Tim handled it like a champ." "Yeah, he proved himself," added my cousin. "No need to get all worked up." I was beyond frustrated. How could they not see how messed up this whole thing was? It wasn't just a prank. It was a deliberate attempt to push Tim to his limits, and they were treating it like some kind of joke. I ignored their texts and focused on Tim. He needed to know that I was in his corner, no matter what. I sat down next to him and took his hand. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I never thought they'd take things this far." Tim gave me a small smile. "It's not your fault. They are who they are, but I'm glad you're standing up for us." That night, I called my mom, hoping she'd be more reasonable. I laid everything out, from the tire slashing to the inhaler stunt. I thought she'd be horrified, but instead she sighed and said, "You know how your dad is. He just wants to make sure Tim's the right fit for you. By risking his health? That's insane, Mom." "I'm not saying it was right," she replied. "But is it really worth all this drama? Family is family. You don't want to start your marriage on bad terms with us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't justifying their actions, but they weren't exactly condemning them either. It felt like I was talking to a wall, and no matter what I said, it wasn't going to make a difference. After I hung up, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. My family was supposed to be supportive, but instead they were tearing us down. It was like they couldn't see Tim for who he really was, a kind, loving, and strong person who didn't need their approval. The next day, things got worse. My brother showed up at our place, ready to hash things out. He came in hot, accusing me of blowing the whole situation out of proportion. "You've always been too sensitive," he said, shaking his head. "Dad's just looking out for you. Why can't you see that?" "Looking out for me?" I shot back. "By hiding Tim's inhaler? By putting his life at risk?" "He wasn't going to die," my brother scoffed. "He's fine. He handled it." "That's not the point," I yelled. "It's about respect. They don't respect him, and they don't respect me." My brother threw up his hands. "Whatever. If you want to be mad, but don't say we didn't try to welcome him into the family." With that, he stormed out, leaving me fuming. Tim, as usual, tried to calm me down, but it wasn't easy. I felt like I was fighting a losing battle, trying to make my family see that their behavior wasn't okay. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversations in my head, wondering what it would take to get through to them. Tim was my priority, and I wasn't going to let anyone, even my own family, disrespect him. But standing up to them was proving to be harder than I ever imagined. The fallout was just beginning, and I knew things were going to get worse before they got better. But no matter what, I was ready to fight for Tim and for our future together. After everything that went down, I knew I couldn't keep tiptoeing around the issue. It was time to draw a line in the sand. My family had crossed too many boundaries, and I was done letting them treat Tim like their personal punching bag. If they couldn't respect him, they weren't going to be part of our lives. Plain and simple. The day after my brother's little visit, I woke up with a new resolve. I couldn't keep having these same arguments over and over again. I had to make it crystal clear where I stood, and if that meant cutting ties, so be it. First up was my dad. I called him and told him we needed to talk. No distractions, no interruptions, just us. He agreed, probably thinking I was going to apologize or back down. Spoiler alert, I wasn't. When I showed up at his house, he was already sitting on the porch, sipping his coffee like it was just another normal day. I didn't waste any time. "Dad, we need to have a serious talk," I started, standing in front of him. "I'm not here to argue, but I'm also not here to let things slide." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "All right, I'm listening." "Look," I said, taking a deep breath, "what you guys did to Tim was wrong. It wasn't a prank, and it wasn't a test. It was cruel. You put his health at risk, and for what? To see if he's man enough? Dad shrugged, still not taking me seriously. We've been through worse, honey. It's just how we do things. Toughen him up a bit, you know? I clenched my fists, trying to keep my cool. No, Dad. That's not how it works. Tim doesn't need to be toughened up. He's strong in ways you can't even understand, and he doesn't need your approval to be a good partner to me. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. So what are you saying? You're cutting us off? I shook my head. I'm saying if you can't respect Tim, then yeah, I'll have to make some tough choices. I'm not going to stand by and let you bully him anymore. This is your chance to make things right. For a moment, he was silent, just staring out into the yard. I could see the gears turning in his head, but I wasn't sure if he was actually getting it or just waiting for me to finish so he could brush it off again. Finally, he spoke. I get that you're upset, but family is family. We've always been like this. You can't just expect us to change overnight. I'm not asking for overnight, I said firmly, but I am asking for change. If you can't meet me halfway, then we're going to have a problem. He didn't respond, just kept staring into the distance. I didn't need an answer right then and there, but I needed him to know I was serious. After that, I headed back home. Tim was waiting for me, looking a little anxious. How'd it go? He asked as soon as I walked through the door. I sighed and sat down next to him. It went okay, I guess. He didn't blow up, but I'm not sure he really gets it yet. Tim nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Thank you for standing up for me. I know it's not easy with your family. Of course, I said, squeezing his hand. You're my priority now, Tim. I'm not going to let anyone disrespect you, not even my own family. The next few days were quiet, almost too quiet. No texts, no calls, just silence. I wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad one, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had made my stance clear, and now it was up to them. Then, just when I thought maybe they were finally getting it, my mom called. She wanted me to come over for dinner, said she had something important to discuss. I agreed, but I brought Tim with me this time. If we were going to have another confrontation, I wanted him there by my side. When we arrived, the atmosphere was tense. My dad was there, along with my brother and cousin. They all looked uncomfortable, like they knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant evening. Mom tried to play the peacemaker, serving up dinner and making small talk, but it was obvious no one was in the mood. After we ate, she finally got to the point. Your father and I have been talking, she began, her tone cautious. We understand you're upset and we want to move past this. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. Okay, and how exactly do you plan to do that? Dad cleared his throat, clearly not thrilled about the whole thing. We'll apologize if that's what you want, but you need to understand, we didn't mean any harm. Tim spoke up for the first time, his voice calm but firm. It's not just about the apology, it's about respect. I need to know this isn't going to happen again. My dad nodded slowly. All right, fine. We won't do anything like that again. It wasn't exactly the heartfelt apology I was hoping for, but it was a start. I glanced at Tim, and he gave me a small nod. We were on the same page. After the dinner, as we were leaving, my mom pulled me aside. Thank you for coming, she whispered. I hope we can start to move forward now. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to believe her, but only time would tell if they were really willing to change. For now, I was just glad we had drawn the line. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for. After the awkward dinner at my parents' house, I thought things might finally start calming down. My dad had begrudgingly agreed to apologize, and for a moment, I believed we could move past everything. But of course, it wasn't that simple. With my family, nothing ever is. A couple of days later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin. Hey, can we talk? I feel like we need to clear the air. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but I figured it was worth hearing him out. Tim encouraged me to go, saying maybe this was a sign they were finally starting to understand. I wasn't holding my breath, but I agreed to meet up. We met at a small cafe near my place. My cousin was already there, nervously fiddling with his phone. As soon as I sat down, he jumped straight into it. Look, I know things got out of hand, and I'm sorry, he said, avoiding eye contact. I raised an eyebrow. Out of hand? You think hiding Tim's inhaler was just out of hand? He sighed. Okay, yeah, it was more than that. It was messed up. But it wasn't meant to be cruel. We were just trying to, I don't know, test him, I guess. See what kind of guy he is? And you didn't think maybe just talking to him like normal people would have worked? I shot back. He nodded, finally meeting my gaze. Yeah, we screwed up. Big time. I'm sorry. For a second, I thought we were making progress. Then he dropped the next part, and I realized why he'd really asked me to meet. But this whole thing has been really hard on the family. Dad's been feeling terrible about how everything's blown up, and your dad, well, he's been saying it's tearing the family apart. Ah, there it was. The guilt trip. I should have seen it coming. My family had this way of apologizing just enough to make you think they were sincere, only to twist it back around and make it your fault for holding a grudge. So what? You're saying I should just forget about it? I asked, crossing my arms. No, no, he quickly replied. I'm just saying maybe we could all sit down together, talk things through properly. Dad thinks if we can all get on the same page, it'll be better for everyone. I sighed. I've already made it clear where I stand. If you guys can't respect Tim, there's nothing more to talk about. He nodded again, looking genuinely conflicted. I get it. I do. But maybe just one more family meeting? For Mom and Dad's sake, they're really struggling with this whole thing. I told him I'd think about it, but deep down, I wasn't sure I had the energy for another round of their manipulative games. I wanted to believe they were trying, but it always seemed to come with strings attached. When I got home, Tim was waiting for me, his usual calm self. How'd it go? He asked. Apology mixed with a side of guilt, I said, flopping onto the couch. They want another family meeting to clear the air. Tim gave me a knowing look. And you're considering it? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me thinks it's just more manipulation, but if there's even a small chance they're serious about making things right, he nodded. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Just remember, you don't owe them anything. You've already given them more chances than they deserve. The next day, my mom called. She must have gotten wind of the conversation with my cousin because she was all sweetness and concern. Honey, we're all so sorry for everything. Your dad and I were talking, and we think it'd be good for everyone if we had a family dinner, just to talk things through. I could hear the hesitation in her voice, like she was walking on eggshells. It was weird, seeing her in this new, almost vulnerable light. Mom, I appreciate the effort, but this isn't just about a dinner. It's about real change. I need to know you're serious about respecting Tim. We are, she insisted. We just want to make things right. Please, give us a chance. I agreed to the dinner, mostly because I felt like I owed it to Tim to give my family one last shot. But I wasn't going in blind this time. I was ready for whatever manipulative tactics they might throw at me. When we arrived, the atmosphere was tense, but there was also this weird, forced politeness. My dad greeted Tim with a stiff handshake, and my brother made a half-hearted joke about how Tim looked healthier than the last time they saw him. It was awkward, to say the least. We sat down, and for a while it was just small talk. Weather, work, the usual. Then my mom cleared her throat, signaling it was time for the real conversation. We've been doing a lot of thinking, she began, glancing nervously at my dad, and we realize we've made some mistakes. Dad nodded, though he didn't say much. I could tell he wasn't thrilled about this whole apology thing, but he was at least going along with it, for now. We're sorry for how we treated you, Tim, Mom continued. It was wrong, and we know we need to do better. Tim nodded, his expression neutral. I appreciate the apology, but it's about more than just words. I need to know this kind of thing won't happen again. Dad finally spoke up, his tone begrudging. It won't. We get it. No more tests, no more games. It should have felt like a win, but something about it still felt off. Maybe it was the way they were all so careful with their words, like they were trying not to say the wrong thing. Or maybe it was just the years of manipulation making it hard for me to trust them. As we left, my mom hugged me tightly. Thank you for giving us another chance. We won't let you down. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But trust isn't something you can rebuild overnight. They'd have to prove it, not just with words, but with actions, and only time would tell if they were truly willing to change. Our wedding day was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. Tim and I had been through so much with my family, and I was determined not to let their drama ruin it. But let's be real, when you have a family like mine, drama is pretty much guaranteed. The morning started off smoothly enough. I woke up early, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves. My bridesmaids were there, hyping me up as we got ready. The whole vibe was light and fun, and for a few hours I almost forgot about all the chaos that had led up to this day. As I was getting my hair done, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a text from my mom. We're not sure if your dad and brother will make it. They're feeling conflicted. Conflicted? Seriously? This was my wedding day and they were still playing these games? I felt a wave of anger rise up, but I pushed it down. I wasn't going to let them get to me. Not today. Tim was waiting for me at the venue, looking as calm and collected as ever. When I told him about the text, he just smiled and said, "It's their loss if they don't show up." I knew he was right, but it still stung. I wanted them there, even after everything. I guess part of me hoped they'd surprise me, show up, and be supportive for once. But as the ceremony time got closer, it became clear that wasn't going to happen. The ceremony itself was perfect. Tim and I exchanged our vows in front of our closest friends and family, the ones who actually cared. The love and support from everyone there made it feel like nothing else mattered. For that moment, it was just us, starting our life together. After the ceremony, we moved on to the reception. The food was great, the music was on point, and everyone was having a blast. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the absence of my dad and brother. Every time I saw my mom, I wondered if she was thinking about it too. About halfway through the reception, my mom pulled me aside. "I'm sorry they didn't come," she said, her eyes full of regret. "They wanted to be here, but they couldn't get past everything." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, I appreciate you being here, but I can't keep doing this. They made their choice," she nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. I just hope someday we can all move past this." I didn't have the energy to argue or even hope for that. I just wanted to focus on the people who were there and the love Tim and I were surrounded by. As the night went on, the initial sting of their absence started to fade. Tim and I danced, laughed, and celebrated with our friends. We even had a few surprises: a hilarious speech from Tim's best man, a spontaneous group dance that got everyone on their feet, and a beautiful moment when my maid of honor shared a heartfelt toast that left me in tears. But of course, the drama wasn't quite over. Just as we were getting ready to cut the cake, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was my cousin. "Hey, heard about the no-show. Can't believe they pulled that on your big day. Let's talk soon." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Why now? Why couldn't they just let me have this day without dragging me back into their nonsense? Tim noticed my reaction and gently took my phone out of my hand. "No more family drama tonight," he said, smiling. "Today's about us." He was right. I needed to let it go, at least for now. So I put my phone away, and we focused on enjoying the rest of the night. The cake was delicious, the dancing went on for hours, and by the end of the night, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and pure joy. Despite everything, we had pulled off an amazing wedding, surrounded by the people who truly mattered. As we headed back to our hotel, I couldn't help but reflect on the day. Yes, my dad and brother had let me down, but Tim and I had each other. We had built a new family with the friends and relatives who supported us, and that was what really mattered. Lying in bed that night, I realized something important. You can't choose your family, but you can choose how much power they have over your life. And on that day, I chose to focus on the love and happiness Tim and I had found together, leaving the drama behind. The wedding wasn't perfect, but it was perfectly ours. And that was enough. After the wedding, I thought things would finally settle down. I mean, Tim and I had been through enough with my family, and I figured we'd earned a little peace. But no, the drama was far from over. In fact, it felt like the real chaos was just beginning. The first sign that things weren't going to calm down came right after we got back from our honeymoon. We'd barely unpacked when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "We need to talk. It's about your dad." I sighed, already bracing myself for whatever nonsense was coming next. Tim, always the voice of reason, told me to call her back and get it over with. So I did. "Mom, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. She sounded stressed. "Your dad's been acting strange ever since the wedding. He's angry you didn't invite him to stay for the whole thing." I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "He didn't even show up, Mom. How does he think he's entitled to complain about not staying?" She sighed. I know, but he's really upset. He feels like you've cut him out of your life." That hit a nerve. "Mom, he cut himself out when he refused to show up for my wedding. I'm not going to keep bending over backward to make him happy." She didn't have much to say after that, so we ended the call, but I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear about it. A few days later, my brother decided to jump into the mix. He showed up at our place, looking smug as ever. "You know, Dad's not the only one pissed," he said as soon as he walked in. "You embarrassed the whole family by not inviting him properly." "Seriously?" I shot back. "He had the invitation. He chose not to come." He shrugged. "Yeah, but you didn't exactly make him feel welcome. And now Mom's stuck dealing with his mood." I rolled my eyes. "I'm not responsible for Dad's feelings. He made his choices and now he's dealing with the consequences." My brother shook his head, clearly not convinced. "You're being selfish. Family should come first." "No," Tim cut in, his voice calm but firm. "Respect comes first. Your dad didn't respect us or our wedding. We're not going to keep chasing after him." My brother didn't have much of a response to that. He mumbled something about needing to go and left, but I could tell this wasn't the end of it. Sure enough, a few days later, I got another call from Mom. This time she sounded more desperate. "Honey, your dad's saying he won't come to any family events if you're there," she said. "He's really upset." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Mom, I can't keep doing this. If he wants to act like that, it's on him. I'm not going to keep bending to his tantrums." "I understand," she said quietly, "but I just wish things were different." "Me too, Mom. Me too." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of passive-aggressive texts, awkward family gatherings, and constant tension. It felt like every time I turned around, someone had something to say about how I was handling things with Dad. Then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my cousin decided to stir the pot. He sent me a long, rambling message about how I needed to make peace with Dad for the sake of the family. "You're tearing us apart," he wrote. "Can't you just be the bigger person?" I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. Why was it always on me to fix things? Why was I the one expected to make peace when I wasn't the one who started the drama? Tim found me sitting on the couch, staring at my phone. "Another guilt trip?" he asked, sitting down next to me. I nodded, handing him the phone. He read the message and sighed. "You don't have to respond. You've said your piece. They need to respect that." "I know," I said quietly. "But it's hard. I hate feeling like I'm the bad guy." "You're not," Tim said firmly. "You're standing up for yourself and for us. That's not being the bad guy." His words helped, but the tension with my family didn't go away. It was like this constant cloud hanging over everything. Every time I talked to my mom, I could feel her trying to tiptoe around the subject, hoping I'd magically change my mind. One night, after another particularly frustrating call with her, Tim sat me down. "We need to set some boundaries," he said. "This is affecting both of us, and it's not fair to you." We spent the next hour talking about what we needed from each other and from my family. It wasn't easy, but by the end of it, I felt a little lighter. We decided to limit contact with my dad and brother until they could show some real respect. The next morning, I sent a message to my mom, laying it all out. I told her that Tim and I loved her, but we couldn't keep dealing with the constant drama. We needed space, and we weren't going to engage with Dad or my brother until they were ready to have a real conversation. Her response was surprisingly understanding. "I get it," she wrote. "I wish things were different, but I support you." It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could start to heal.